Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night. There is so much to talk about. So today we are going to cover the good and the bad, and I'm going to try to alternate between the two to keep things balanced. But before we get into all that, this is a brand new channel. So if you like this video and want to see more of this type of content, please do make sure you hit that subscribe button below and the little bell so that YouTube notifies you when we release more videos. So let's start on a positive note with some of the good. No matter the criticisms of this episode, and there are several, it still gets an A- from me. Why? Because of the emotion this episode pulled for me. I was on the edge of my seat from beginning to end. There was a portion of it where I wondered if anyone at all was going to make it out alive. It gave me that whole, oh my God, we're all going to die, hopeless feeling for a short while. And man, any show that can pull that emotion out of me definitely ranks high up there. And even though they've run out of George R. R. Martin's writing and they have Hollywoodified the hell out of it, it's still, in my opinion, the best TV show ever. And if we just think about that for a second, the fact that it's a TV show at all, we have to acknowledge that no other TV show compares really. When have we ever seen hour-long plus epic battles with dragons and dragonfire and thousands of combatants on a TV show ever? The answer is never. So we have to give it its due for that before we get into the criticisms. That said, it is time to get into some criticisms, and we have to begin by talking about the battle plan. First, you don't send your cavalry straight into the darkness against an unseen enemy. You don't put your commanders like Brienne and Grey Worm on the front lines and then have them live through a swarm of whites that would kill any normal human just by trampling alone. And you don't put your whole army in front of the trench. And you especially don't do any of that when you have superior air power and you know the opponent has superior numbers. I mean, what the hell, man? Let's put our biggest and best form of defense up on a hill and render them mostly useless. Who thought of this? And I get that they wanted to wait for the Night King and protect Bran, but they knew they were up against insanely superior numbers. They should have had the dragons out there from moment one, just dousing as many whites as they could with dragonfire before they allowed all the whites to even get close to their army. They should have had the trenches in front of the army to kill as many whites as possible before they got to our army and started killing our people. I mean, we lost the cavalry in 3.2 seconds. Come on now. And let's not forget that the safest place to be when fighting a dude that raises the dead is where? Oh yeah, it's in the crypts with dead people. Like, no one thought that the dude that raises dead people might, raise some dead people? Yeah, I know, pretty much everyone called that in advance. But let's give them credit for the feeling generated by both seeing all of the Dothraki swords lit up by Melisandre in the beginning, that momentary sense of hope and just a glimmer of hope before all those swords get snuffed out and that feeling changes to a sense of dread that I can't remember ever feeling watching a television show in my life. And of course, immediately after that, Dany decides to depart from said horrible battle plan and come in with some air power, which would have been nice if we started with that, but hey, I've already bitched about that. But I have to gripe about something else that I never thought I'd say about a show ever, but this is Game of freaking Thrones, not Happy Days Are Here Again. And there wasn't enough death. Not for Game of Thrones. One of the things that has made this show so amazing, or made it so amazing in the beginning, was that anyone could die. Absolutely anyone at any time. Not with Hollywood. In Hollywood, we have plot armor, and we make it look ridiculous. Again, my issue with several of our major players being on the front lines and surviving when literally no one else on the front lines did. Come on now. And then there was this segment where Brienne, Jaime, and Pod were all up against the Winterfell castle walls, completely surrounded by whites, yet they come out of it in the end. Yeah, okay, how? Jorah dies fending off less whites than the numbers surrounding those three. So, again, come on now. So I feel like the creators did a better job when they had less money. There was less sensationalism and more realism. In this, they decided they wanted to give us dark and foggy and smoky and all of that for realism, but yet completely sacrificed realism by allowing our biggest fighters to survive completely unrealistic situations that no one else in the universe would survive. And so that kind of irks me. I loved the realism of the first 5 years of Game of Thrones, and this, would have liked a little bit more realism there. So I was happy with the deaths that we did have, but disappointed that we didn't also lose Jamie, Brienne, and Pod. Jamie and Brienne, I felt both had wonderful character arc completions in episode 2. And as far as I'm concerned, we can lose Pod if we lose Brienne. Plus, he had that wonderful song last episode, so this would have been a fine time for him to go out. But keeping with the death and going back to the good, we had a couple of awesome deaths. Lyanna Mormont's was probably the best one for me. Now, was it a total fan service death? Yes, absolutely. But I was okay with that. Even really good with the fan service death on this one. I mean, who can't love little Lyanna Mormont? You wanted her to go out in some cool way, and stabbing a giant in the eye is about as heroic of a death as she could have. A nice little David and Goliath moment. Then, of course, Jorah's death was good too, if we ignore the fact that he should have died during the initial charge with the Dothraki and their suicide mission. But if we ignore all that, well, we know if Jorah could have chosen the way he'd die, he'd undoubtedly choose a death where he's fighting for the queen he loves. So it was appropriately heroic and poetic, and Emilia Clarke did a great job as an actress in that scene as well. And then Drogon coming around behind her while she was weeping over Jorah was a nice touch too. Beric Dondarrion had a good death. It was kind of like he sort of had a Jesus moment there where he's looking up, the light shining down on him and the arms on both sides, and it just made a very good visual, I thought. And we lost a few others as well, but not as spectacularly. So let's go back to the bad and my third biggest gripe about this episode. What the hell was Bran doing the whole time? I expected him to do, I don't know, something. But no, he just wargs off, doesn't tell poor Theon where he's going either. He just splits, and Theon is left with the Ironborn to defend him, this bump on a log who seems to do nothing to contribute to anything. Now, it's my guess that, at least in some way, Bran orchestrated this whole thing. I mean, he was the one who gave Arya the cat's paw dagger last season. He was also the one who saw how the Children of the Forest made the Night King in front of the weirwood tree by stabbing him in the heart with the dragon glass. And he seemed to be controlling when things happened to a degree, such as telling Sam when it was time to tell Jon that he's the rightful heir of the throne. He also refused to go down to the crypts and insisted that he must be by the weirwood tree to lure the Night King there. So, I don't know, maybe he saw how it was all supposed to go down in advance, but the problem is the show creators didn't give us any of that. My best hope is that they fill in some of the blanks where Bran is concerned next episode, so we'll see. Now back to the good and some of my favorite footage this episode. Arya. Now, I am an Arya fan to begin with, and I pretty much loved every scene she was in. Everything from giving Sansa the dagger and telling her to stick him with the pointy end, to saving Sandor from the battlements, to her awesome kick-ass fighting scene on top of the battlements, to her evasion scene in the library. My only complaint with any of that was that her fight scene at the top of the battlements was not nearly long enough. I could have watched her kick ass for longer for sure. But some people said that they thought that she was a Mary Sue, or that her killing the Night King wasn't set up well, and I disagree with that. I felt going into this episode that Arya would be extremely integral, that she was the most well-prepared of anyone, and that it was possible that she might actually be the one to kill the Night King. Or uncreate him. I actually think uncreate is probably more accurate. The whole thing with being in front of the weirwood tree, getting stabbed with the Valyrian steel, almost in the same spot where he got stabbed with the dragon glass and all that. I kind of feel like they were looking at it as more of an uncreation than a killing, but that brings us back to the bad. The Night King's death, and we'll just call it death to make it easier, was very unsatisfying in my opinion. I mean, I wasn't upset that it was Arya. I was actually very cool with the fact that it was Arya. I would have been cool with Arya or Jon, and it didn't really matter to me. But I felt that her stealth and her evasion abilities would allow her to do that, though I have no idea how on earth she could come from above. But I can dismiss that because I did feel that she was qualified for the job. What I can't dismiss, though, is my lack of feeling about it. We never really learned anything more about the Night King other than he just wanted all humans dead. So yeah, we dislike the Night King for that, obviously, but they never made me hate him enough to feel the satisfaction that I felt when Dany's brother Viserys got his molten golden crown death, or the near elation I felt watching that son of a bitch Joffrey turn colors when he choked to death from the poison, or when I heard the sickening sounds of Ramsay being torn apart by his own dogs. This Night King moment, it was a happy moment, like, I guess a little bit, but it was definitely missing some of the satisfaction, the real satisfaction, some of that strong emotion for me. But back to the good for a moment. Sansa and Tyrion's wordless scene in the crypt was fantastic. What a great actress Sophie Turner has become. And of course, I expect that kind of acting quality from Peter Dinklage already. But yeah, man, they did a fantastic job. They made me feel like they were feeling it was their last moments. Like they definitely thought they were going to die. And they did it without words. Oh, was that fabulous. But I felt, again, this is sort of same as the Night King's death. I feel like we didn't really get any payoff after that, but I can't take that scene away from the actors or what they made me feel in that moment. So that goes in the good category. And speaking of feelings, I think another actor who is integral for making us feel a whole bunch of fear and hopelessness in this episode was John Bradley, who plays Samwell Tarly. Everything from the beginning with his hands shaking and the looks on his face, and then later when he found himself literally laying in a pile of dead whites and he's just stabbing away at anything that lands on him or anything that comes near him. And he's even crying at one point in the midst of it all too. It was just so fitting for the moment, for the character, all of that. And I felt like he made us feel a lot in this episode. And the emotion to me was the big thing about this episode. That was the big positive thing that they did with this episode. And yeah, I think John Bradley's become a great actor. Another part that I thought was great was when the Night King raised the dead. This is another emotional sequence to me. We had the look on John's face when he saw it happening, of course, but his was a not again type look. But what I thought was really fantastic was the look on Jaime's face and on the faces of the people who hadn't seen this little trick by the Night King before. You know, they think they're done, that there's almost no whites left, but then they see the dead rising once again, and man, oh man, can you even imagine how you'd feel in that moment? So yeah, I thought that part was great as well. I thought the dragon battle in the air was very cool. Again, when do we get to see a dragon battle in the air on a TV show, first off? I feel like we're very spoiled by Game of Thrones, that we see things that we've never been able to see before and we pick them apart, but we've got to give the creators credit for even pulling something like this off. The only thing was, it was difficult to see who was clawing who during that battle. And a lot of people complained about the difficulty seeing in this episode in general. Me, I'm of mixed mind. On one hand, I do feel it added to the realism. On the other, I also feel like the dragon battle in particular suffered a bit for the sake of that realism. I would have liked to have been able to see it a bit better. But I did like the chaotic feeling that the lack of vision created in other parts, like when Dany and Jon run into each other on the dragons in air, and even some of the parts on the ground where the lack of visual brought us into feeling what I think the characters would have felt in those moments. So speaking of feeling again, this is, again, the strength of this episode to me was the emotion it created. And the musical score, oh, the guys that did that, they need props for that. It was brilliant. I didn't pick up on the score so much during my first viewing of it. I didn't realize how the score was manipulating my emotions, but on the second and third viewing, I most definitely noticed how the music manipulated my emotions, and it was just outstanding. They used piano in this one section, this very somber piano, where you just think everyone's going to die, and the reason that you feel like everyone's going to die in large part is due to that piano score. So just outstanding, mad props for that. And that covers the main points, both good and bad for me. I could go into even more detail, but we don't want to be here all day. And I want to wind down with reviewing the deaths we saw this episode, because there's been some contention as to who died and who didn't because of all the lack of visuals. So For sure, we lost Kono, the head Dothraki dude. He died during the Dothraki Horde sacrifice, and we know this because he reappeared with blue eyes when the Night King raised the dead. We lost Dolorous Ed, aka Eddard Tolet, aka the 999th and last Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, and we lost him right after he saved Sam. Then we already discussed Lyanna Mormont, Beric Dondarrion, and Jorah Mormont, and the loss of Lyanna and Jorah are the end to House Mormont of Bear Island, so R.I.P. House Mormont. We also lost Theon in what was more or less a suicide run at the Night King. I didn't necessarily love his death, but the important part for Theon's character was the dialogue between Theon and Bran that indicated that Theon was redeemed and thereby completed his character arc.
I just want you to know, I wish the things I did...
Everything you did brought you where you are now. Where you belong. Home.
Then, of course, we lost the Night King, his Ice Dragon Viserion, and all the Whites and White Walkers who fell after his death. And speaking of White Walkers, let's just acknowledge that they seemed about as useless as Bran. And it probably would have been nice to see some of our major fighters engaging with and maybe killing a White Walker or two rather than just being surrounded by swarms of Whites throughout the entire battle. Then we also lost Melisandre as she walked down a magically cleared path just outside the gates of Winterfell and collapsed into miraculously pristine snow, only a few dozen feet away from where everyone and their brother who perished just a few hours before had somehow vanished into thin air. So those were the definite deaths. There's been a lot of speculation about several other characters to include Jon's dragon, Rhaegal, Ghost, Gilly, Tormund, and Sandor Clegane. All of them are definitely still alive. And that wraps up my first video on this channel. Once again, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you leave. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today, and I look forward to seeing you back again next time. Bye now.